Construction stations.
Hello and welcome. Today's video is a bit different. I was sent this replay by Leah and she asked me for help. She wants to get better at the game, specifically the Östergötland. Along with the replay, she also sent me time-stamped comments about the match. My initial impression of this match was that it's actually alright, but reading her explanations changed my mind. So let's jump into it. First thing she writes, I'm not quite sure how to play the Östergötland. Its guns don't seem that good and its torpedoes seem questionable at best. My usual policy is to go towards a point, fire a torpedo volley at likely positions and hopefully spot the enemy DD's initial wave of torpedoes. She also writes that she doesn't think that she can win a gun battle against any of the enemy destroyers, so spotting will be an issue. The usual policy you have is fine, but more importantly, you have to understand that the Östergötland is a great torpedo destroyer. Her torpedoes are really fast. They might not deal a lot of damage, but the stealthiness and the speed of them means that the torpedoes are more likely to hit than most other destroyer torpedoes. Because of that, the Östergötland is very scary to destroyers. The guns on her are also pretty good. They deal a lot of damage for a torpedo boat in particular, but they are short-ranged. The shells are relatively slow, so when you fire at longer ranges you just end up missing more and more because the shells are kind of floaty. And I think it's critically important to know these things because these are the ship's strengths and you should try to play for your strengths. The bit about spotting is also a little weird because destroyers don't really fight each other directly, at least not this early on in the match. Because if you spot an enemy destroyer and you start shooting at it, what happens is that everyone on the enemy team that can shoot you is gonna shoot you, and everyone on your team that can shoot the enemy destroyer is gonna shoot them. And with these two things combined, the destroyer own firepower kinda becomes unimportant. And that's why destroyers don't really want to fight each other early on. It's a huge waste of their HP and a big gamble. This is a very nice torpedo dodge. Also, the use of the speed boost here is correct because it makes you accelerate a lot faster. The decision to leave the cap zone is completely correct because that destroyer in the smokescreen will just keep firing at you. And the fact that your torpedoes are coming up and you can actually launch them at the smokescreen is also extremely good. However, I do have a little bit of a comment. These are widespread torpedoes. Don't launch widespread torpedoes. This image illustrates why you shouldn't. Widespread torpedoes make it more likely that the enemy ship will be able to slip between the gaps of torpedoes. It is significantly easier to dodge them that way. Speaking of torpedoes, earlier when she fired her first set of torpedoes, she wrote, I fire my first torpedo volley with the intention of controlling different vectors towards the cap zone. If I can make a ship move with these volleys, I'll consider it a win. My question is, why? Why is it a win if they move from your torpedoes? Shouldn't it be a win if you hit them with the Torps? You're a torpedo destroyer after all. But that aside, for the current situation she writes, I realize that my Tashkent has lost a duel badly, so I open fire on the enemy Tashkent in an attempt to save my ally Tashkent. And I miss a lot. I think this is a great decision. You should absolutely engage the enemy destroyer in this situation for two main reasons. Number one, your guns are actually pretty good. The Östergötland in this kind of a situation at this kind of a range is very good at dealing damage to enemy destroyers. Number two, you have a whole team behind you. There are multiple ships here that are gonna assist you, or at least they should assist you. And these are big ships. You're fighting on your side of the map. They should be interested in shooting the Tashkent. However, you are starting to take a fair amount of damage, so maybe something you could do is break off and stop firing, and then turn around and go back to spot her again. Because right now it appears like your teammates just aren't engaging. And that's a problem, but if you give them more time, I'm sure they will engage. And really the cost of not sinking the Tashkent so quickly is negligible, because she can't really do that much from that position. But the Monarch finally decides to fire at the destroyer and that's good night for the Tashkent. She found out why you don't push onto the enemy side of the map and then try to 1 versus 3 against the battleships. Not a good plan in open water. In this kind of a situation, you should always damage control party. Your DCP is a 40-second cooldown. You basically don't lose anything by using it here. She also writes that Angus is the real hero of this game, that is the Monarch player. He finishes off the Tashkent and lets me slip away from an engagement that I was going to lose. I disagree here. I think that's what he should have done. In fact, that's what the other battleship and the cruiser should have done. She goes on to write that she decides to rejoin the battle and plans to go through the middle of the two large islands, hoping to spot while remaining safe given her low HP. There's a problem with this though, because she's sailing straight towards the Chapayev. She was visible just now, right next to the... Yeah, see? There's a Chapayev there. Within 12 kilometers, which means you are in radar range. You could have predicted this if you had noticed the Chapayev earlier. But honestly, it's fine. You're actually not that low HP. 10.6k HP is just fine. Although, it would be nice if you still had a heal. And considering that Chapayev is pushing into a Monarch and a Musashi, she's probably more scared in this situation than you are. Your torpedoes on the Hawk look on point, and turning around to try to get closer to the Hawk is a great choice. Because the plan should be to think ahead, right? Think about where you would want to be once your 40-second reload time on the Torps is up. You'd like to be as close to that Hawk as possible so that your next torpedo salvo can hit even more torpedoes, right? Honestly, I would like you to be a little closer to the Hawk so you can land a better set of torpedoes next time, but considering the Chapayev, I guess this is good enough. But it is a very scary situation for your Musashi because she's fighting the Hawk at close range and the Marco Polo. Well, she was fighting the Marco Polo. Anyway, the next set of Torps is obviously on the Hawk, and that's a good choice. But I want to emphasize again, don't fire widespread torpedoes, narrow spread is better. Also, you just got spotted, and you can't see them, so the only ship it can be is the Kagero. And there she is. Leah writes about this: I get spotted as I'm lining up a torpedo volley on the Hawk, and only see the Kagero after I fire both sets of torpedoes. Oops. I have no choice but to engage the Kagero, but I'm visible to the Hawk, Chapayev and Kagero. I think I'm dead here. I disagree, because the Chapayev has left, the Hawk is busy with the Musashi, and your gun should be able to outfight the Kagero. But on top of that, you have a Monarch on your team that actually shoots destroyers. But even without the Monarch, I think you should have won this fight, or at least it would have been very close. Leah then writes, I see that the Johnston is also surprisingly low. I don't have any more heals, but I also don't want him lining up shots on either of my two battleships. The problem here is that the Johnston is out of your range. She says that she's about to engage when Angus Nee kills the Johnston. I have no idea how this person is so good at shooting destroyers, but I'm very glad he's on my team. My Musashi deletes the Hawk a moment later and avoids torpedoes somehow. So the flank is more or less won except for the Seattle, but he's quite far away. I decide to head into B and try to cap our spot since we don't have much spotting at the moment. This is an okay plan, but you do have to remember that now you actually are low HP. And if you sail into the Seattle, it's gonna be a very scary situation for you. Seattle has no problem doing all of your HP and damage in just a few seconds. However, you do have two battleships that can back you up, and both of those will make quick work of Seattle. In this situation, if possible, you would like to avoid the Seattle. Unfortunately, she's right there. Your first reaction here should have been to immediately turn, because Seattle has a 9 kilometer radar. And the moment you enter 9 kilometers, she's almost certainly gonna spot you. And you're perfectly broadside on. If she had fired on you instead of the Musashi, she might have actually sunk you with that first salvo, or the second one. Also here, switching to AP is a very weird choice. You should definitely fire HE. There is no way your AP is gonna do anything against a cruiser, especially from this kind of a range. Anyway, since you're spotted anyway, you can just fire, it doesn't really matter. And honestly, the game is so won, it kinda doesn't matter what you do either way. But AP here is a complete waste. Just fire HE, because your AP just can't pen, the guns aren't big enough. Wow, that Seattle has survived way longer against the Musashi than I would have thought. Well, that just ended, but still, that was way longer than I would have thought. Anyway, the game is over. I don't think you're gonna be able to do anything anymore because the enemy only has 2 ships and they seem to be very far away. On that note though, I would like to mention that this Angus Knee you kept mentioning is actually Angus NL because he is Dutch. Anyway, the game is over and she does write things to improve on immediately. And she says, I was too often surprised by the enemy ships. The Kagera caught me completely by surprise and the Seattle too. I need to pay better attention to the minimap. And my answer to here is, there was no way you could have known the Kagera was coming. There was no indicator for it. Everyone should have been surprised. But honestly, the Kagera was more surprised by you than you of her, because she was in a dangerous position, much more dangerous than you were, because she was on your side of the map with 2 battleships around. If she gets spotted, she gets slapped by the battleships, which is exactly what happened. Whereas if you get spotted, that is a good thing because you're basically shielding your battleships, you're spotting for them. You're making sure that a destroyer can't sneak up on them to torpedo them. So the Kagera was absolutely fine. The Chapayev was... you should have seen her coming. But the Seattle, that was just a gamble, because she could have been at sea or she could have been coming to B. In fact, if you were to really think about it logically, what the Seattle did was kind of weird, because she decided to basically rush into a position where she knew that she was gonna be fighting a Musashi and potentially a Monarch at the same time. That's just a losing battle for a light cruiser. So it's not that weird that you didn't see her coming. She also writes some long-term goal, which is, I'm not sure my early game strategy is wise. It feels like there's more that I could do, but I don't know what that could be. And I don't really have a good answer to this. I don't think there really is much that you could do early game. Sure, you could try to line up more aggressive torpedoes on some of the enemies, but I think you already played very aggressively for the cap zone. And I think that's just good enough. I think as long as you survive the early game without taking too much damage, things are okay. But I do have some of my own recommendations. Number 1, don't fire widespread torpedoes. Fire narrow spread torpedoes. Number 2, play into the strengths of your ship. Figure out what your ship's strengths are and then try to take advantage of them. You could use something like the World of Warships ship builder tool, link in the description, to figure out like what your ship is good at. Number 3, try to envision the future. Think about where you should be in the future to do some beneficial action. This is particularly useful as a torpedo destroyer like at the Östergötland. You should always think ahead of where you would like to be by the time your torpedoes are reloaded. Things don't always work out according to that, but if they do, then it's very helpful if you had thought about it beforehand, because you end up in a better position to actually torpedo the enemies. But all in all though, I think this match was played just fine. I didn't really see any glaring problems other than the widespread torpedoes. I'm actually surprised you managed to land any real torpedoes with widespread. So, would you guys like to see more videos like this, where I do a replay analysis of some kind? If you do, let me know in the comments. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.